Joining us now to talk about the lack of attention the media has given to Mr. Obama's role in Iraq, Tim Graham, the Director of Media Analysis for the Media Research Center. Tim, it is so good to have you here on America's Forum.
Well, thank you.
And as you Skype in, Tim, you point to major network coverage on June 12th of this latest outbreak of violence in Iraq. And it's worth noting from the alphabets, you assess their coverage as follows. First of all, NBC briefly noted Obama's decision to withdraw the troops. ABC did not even use the word Obama. And from CBS, there was one mention of the Obama administration. Tim, is yet again this a conscious decision of the networks trying to protect this particular president?
I think it looks that way. It's interesting because their coverage of the country itself, the scene itself, is very dark. Terry Moran is on the scene for ABC, and even while they're not mentioning Obama, they're talking about how bleak it looks or how severe these Islamic jihadists are. You almost would think that in the absence of say a Dick Cheney coming in and saying, "I told you so," that might have put them more on the Obama defensive. That they basically said this is going really badly, and then didn't really connect it in any way to Obama's withdrawal. I guess you could also say they also didn't say, well, this pretty much rips apart everything that President Bush spent most of his administration trying to accomplish. They just didn't have a political spin on it, at least not yesterday. And then yesterday in the afternoon, ABC's John Carl, and it sounded to me like a lot of the press corps yesterday was suggesting Joe Biden and other people in this administration said this was an achievement for Obama. How does that look now? That exchange, that press conference, certainly wasn't featured last night on ABC's World News. So there is that tendency to say, well, we're not going to tell you it's not going badly. We're just not going to connect it in any way to this White House.
Well, there's almost the situation, Tim, and certainly I had my frustrations, even as a former broadcaster serving as a conservative Republican on Capitol Hill, because it always seems that the dominant media culture carries the brief for the left. And this is nothing new. I've read the new book, Reagan at Reykjavik, and when you read what Ken Edelman has to write about the return from Reykjavik for then President Reagan, it was to universal derision from the usual suspects, the New York Times, Time Magazine, the alphabet networks. But have the networks taken this to a new level with President Obama, allowing the narrative that, he's really not to blame? You have to depersonalize this from the president, even though militarily he is our commander-in-chief.
It's more what they're not saying than what they're saying. I think that this is bad news for Obama. I think it's bad news on, for his approval rating. But if that's gonna happen, it's apparently not gonna happen with them leading a charge. And remember, 8 years ago at this time, they were constantly suggesting that the president was a failure. And they wrote books with titles like Fiasco. I mean, they very much suggested that this was Bush's legacy. And let's face it, Bush wanted this to be his legacy. Bush invested, most of his presidency in this war on terror. And then you look at his domestic achievements and say, well, that wasn't what Republican voters were looking for when they elected him in 2000. But it is funny in this sense, and that is this has been a very bad month or a very bad 2 or 3 weeks for Barack Obama. And the news media have had a hard time sort of digging him out of it. We went from the VA scandal getting very serious. They tried to fix it with the Bo Bergdahl deal. That was a bad week. And here's another bad week for Obama.
Now, Mr. Graham, I'm curious, is there a difference between U.S. coverage and the international coverage of this conflict?
Well, I'm not sure. I haven't watched enough of the international coverage over the last day or two. Obviously, to some degree, our media has always wanted not to be too far off the way the international press is covering it. Our media has a great reverence, for example, the British, the BBC. So, and I think that on some level does color their coverage of wars.
So you think the international media is also really stepping away from blaming Obama or mentioning a lot about our administration?
Well, you'd have to guess that. I think that this is the real storyline here for the international media ought to be, here comes the Arab winter. You know, the Arab Spring doesn't look too good right now.
And, you know, the insurgents have also captured NATO allies, Turkish diplomats and citizens, and we're not hearing a lot about that either. And what are the implications of that?
Well, and this is one of those areas that you almost want to give the American networks an A just for covering this. You know, the fact of the matter is our media, especially our morning shows, are much more comfortable, you know, doing stories on peanut butter and whether it sticks to the roof of your mouth. That kind of a story. Here they are doing an actual international story.
And so at least showing up and giving some mention is better than not. And Tim, as we thank you for your remarks, we would note we are not the media. We're Newsmax TV. So there's a real distinction. That's why we're happy to have you on today. Tim Graham from the Media Research Center, and we hope you'll come back and join us again real soon, okay?
Thanks.
So Tim Graham, Morgan, offering his thoughts. We'd love to have your thoughts on this and media coverage of our bystander in chief. Why don't you tweet us your thoughts at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum. There's also email and Facebook.